The moment Captain Dylan Marsh asked the quiet woman standing alone near the shooting range for her call sign, he expected a laugh from his Marines, maybe an awkward excuse, possibly silence. What he didn't expect was the two-word answer that would make a decorated Marine captain freeze mid-sentence and realize he had just challenged the most dangerous operator in U.S. military history. 6 hours earlier, the sun hadn't yet burned through the early morning fog rolling across Camp Pendleton's advanced sniper range. The air smelled like gun oil and dust, sharp and familiar, the kind of scent that lived in the pores of anyone who spent enough time on a military base. Captain Marsh stood at the edge of the range, arms crossed, watching his team prep for the quarterly qualification shoot. He'd run this drill 100 times, knew every position, every wind adjustment, every margin for error. His Marines moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment, calibrating scopes, laying out ammunition in careful rows. These were his best, handpicked for their skill and discipline, the kind of shooters who could thread a needle at 800 meters. And Marsh made sure they knew it, not through arrogance, but through standards that didn't bend. Winds shifting east, he called out, voice carrying across the line. A gesture dope accordingly. A chorus of affirmatives followed. Everything ran like clockwork, exactly how he liked it. That's when he noticed her. She stood off to the side, near the equipment lockers, wearing dark athletic pants and a plain gray jacket zipped halfway. No uniform, no insignia, no identifier of any kind. Her hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, her posture relaxed but not lazy, hands resting loosely at her sides. She wasn't watching the Marines work. She was watching the range itself, the way someone studies a familiar room they haven't entered in a while. Marsh's eyes narrowed slightly. Civilians weren't allowed on the range during live qualifications. Families sometimes got cleared for observation from the rear viewing area, but never this close, never unsupervised. Sergeant Torres, he called without looking away. His senior NCO jogged over immediately. Sir. Who's that? Marsh gestured with a slight tilt of his head. Torres followed his gaze and shrugged. No idea, sir. Wasn't here during setup. Marsh felt irritation begin to creep in, the kind that came from variables he hadn't accounted for. Find out. Yes, sir. Torres started toward her, but Marsh raised a hand. I'll handle it. He wanted to see this for himself, figure out how someone had slipped through without authorization, make sure his range stayed controlled. He walked over, boots crunching on gravel, his presence intentionally commanding. She turned as he approached, her gaze meeting his without hesitation, without concern. That alone felt off. Most civilians showed some nervousness around a Marine captain on an active range. She didn't. Morning, Marsh said, his tone professional but edged with authority. This is a restricted area during live fire. Would need to see your authorization. She didn't answer right away, just held his gaze for a beat longer than felt comfortable. Then she spoke, her voice calm, even. I'm cleared. By who? Marsh asked, not moving. Higher up than you need to know right now, she said, no arrogance in it, just fact. Marsh felt the irritation sharpen. He didn't like vague answers. Ma'am, unless you've got paperwork or a sponsor, I need you off this range. She didn't argue, didn't escalate. She just tilted her head slightly, studying him the way someone evaluates a chess move. You running the qual shoot today? The shift in subject caught him off guard. Yeah. What? Mind if I watch? Marsh almost laughed. This isn't a spectator event. I know what it is, she said quietly. And something in the way she said it made him pause, because it didn't sound like curiosity. It sounded like experience. Before he could respond, Torres called out from the line. Captain, we're ready when you are. Marsh glanced back, then at her again. Stay here. Don't move. We'll sort this after the shoot. She gave a small nod, no resistance. And that should have been the end of it. But an hour later, after his Marines had fired their strings and logged their scores, after the range had gone quiet except for the distant crack of another unit firing on a neighboring course, Marsh found himself walking back toward her. She hadn't moved, still standing in the same spot, hands in her jacket pockets now, watching everything with that same calm focus. Two of his younger Marines, Corporal Hayes and Lance Corporal Kim, stood nearby, grinning at each other like they'd just come up with the world's best joke. Bet she's some officer's girlfriend, Hayes muttered, just loud enough to carry. Kim snorted. Probably doesn't even know what a call sign is. Marsh should have shut it down. But he didn't. Because part of him wanted to know too. Wanted to understand why she carried herself like she belonged when nothing about her appearance suggested military background. So instead of stopping them, he walked up and asked the question himself, voice loud enough for his Marines to hear, casual enough to sound like banter. So what's your call sign? And she turned, looked directly at him, and answered without hesitation. Raven 6. The words hit the air like a dropped grenade. Marsh's entire body went rigid. The grin fell off Hayes' face. Kim's eyes widened. Because every Marine on that range knew exactly what Raven 6 meant. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath, thick enough to feel. Captain Marsh stood frozen, his mind racing through every brief he'd ever sat through, every classified after-action report he'd been cleared to read, every whispered legend passed between operators in places civilians would never see. And Raven 6 sat at the center of all of it. Not a person, a ghost. The call sign had surfaced in fragments over the years, attached to operations that officially never happened, in countries the U.S. military officially never entered. Hostage extractions that succeeded against impossible odds. High-value targets eliminated with surgical precision. Entire enemy cells dismantled overnight. And at the center of every story, the same call sign, always leading from the front, always getting everyone out. Marsh had assumed Raven 6 was a SEAL, maybe Delta, someone operating so far above his clearance level that names didn't matter. He'd never once considered it might be a woman. And he'd certainly never imagined she'd be standing on his range in civilian clothes, looking like she'd just come from a morning run. His mouth opened, then closed. Words wouldn't form correctly. Behind him, Corporal Hayes had gone pale. "Holy shit," he whispered. Marsh's throat tightened. He forced himself to speak, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "You are your Raven 6? She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't react to the shift in his posture at all. She just gave a small nod. "I am. The Raven 6? Kim stammered. "Mosul? Kandahar?" Yes, she said simply, cutting him off before he could finish, before he could name operations that were still buried under classification levels none of them could touch. Marsh felt heat creep up the back of his neck, a visceral wave of embarrassment and disbelief crashing into him all at once. He'd questioned her clearance. He'd told her to stay put like she was some lost tourist. He'd let his Marines mock her. "Captain Dylan Marsh," he said quickly, snapping to attention without thinking, the instinct overriding everything else. "Sir, ma'am, I didn't." She raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "You didn't know? It's fine." But it wasn't fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. Because Marsh had just dismissed someone whose record made his entire career look like basic training. Sergeant Torres jogged over, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Everything okay, sir?" Marsh didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at the woman in front of him, trying to reconcile the quiet, unassuming presence with the legend he'd heard whispered in ops centers. "Torres," Marsh managed finally. "This is Raven 6. Torres blinked. Once. Twice. Then his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something close to awe. "Ma'am," he said immediately, straightening. She acknowledged him with a nod, then looked back at Marsh. "You've got a solid team here. Clean fundamentals. Good discipline." The compliment landed like a blade, not because it was harsh, but because it came from someone who had every right to judge and found them merely competent. Marsh swallowed hard. "Thank you, ma'am. We try to maintain standards." "I can see that." Her gaze drifted toward the range again, and for the first time, something shifted in her posture. Not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. This where they run the advanced precision course now. "Yes, ma'am. Quarterly quals. Then we cycle the top shooters through for specialized training." She nodded slowly. "I trained here. Long time ago." Marsh's mind reeled. "Here? At Pendleton? Before the call sign," she said. "Before everything else." Silence settled again, but this time it carried a different weight. Respect. Understanding. The knowledge that the woman standing in front of them had walked the same ranges, breathed the same dust, and then gone so far beyond it that most of them couldn't even imagine the distance. Hayes cleared his throat, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why are you here?" She looked at him, and for just a moment, something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Consulting," she said. "DoD asked me to evaluate some training protocols. Make recommendations." Marsh felt his stomach drop. You're here to evaluate us? Not you specifically, she said. But I was told this unit runs one of the tighter programs. Figured I'd see for myself. And? Marsh asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. You've got good shooters. Solid tactics. But you're teaching them to pass a test, not to survive a real engagement. The words hit harder than any reprimand. Because she was right. He knew she was right. What would you change? He asked, and this time there was no pride in the question, just genuine need to know. She looked back at the range, eyes scanning the targets, the positions, the setup. Wind flies are predictable. Real field conditions aren't. Your shooters are calculating dope for perfect scenarios. She paused. In the field, you don't get perfect. You get chaos. And you have 30 seconds to make a shot that saves lives or ends them. Marsh absorbed every word, his mind already reframing the training he'd been running for years. You willing to show us? Torres asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. She turned back to them, and this time there was no hesitation. Give me a rifle. 15 minutes later, she stood at the 1,000-meter line, the Barrett M82 resting against her shoulder with the kind of ease that only came from muscle memory burned in over years. No spotter, no calculation time, just her, the rifle, and a target most of his Marines struggled to hit, even with support. The wind shifted. She adjusted, one smooth motion. The shot cracked across the range, sharp and final. Downrange, the steel target rang, center mass. Marsh stared through his binoculars, then lowered them slowly, unable to speak. She safed the rifle, stepped back, and looked at him. That's what real looks like. And in that moment, Captain Dylan Marsh understood exactly how far he still had to go. The rest of the day unfolded in a way Captain Marsh would remember for the rest of his career. Not because of what was said, but because of what was shown. Raven 6 didn't lecture. She demonstrated. And every demonstration dismantled another assumption his Marines had built their confidence on. She ran them through scenarios they'd never trained for. Shooting from unstable positions, calculating wind drift without instruments, making distance calls in seconds instead of minutes. She moved between them with an efficiency that felt almost surgical, adjusting a grip here, correcting a stance there, her voice calm and precise. Your breathing's off, she told Kim during a rapid engagement drill. You're holding too long. In the field, you don't get that luxury. 2 seconds, make the call, take the shot. Kim nodded, adjusted, fired. The round landed clean. Better, she said. Not praise, just acknowledgement. But it hit harder than any compliment could have. By mid-afternoon, the entire unit had gathered, even the Marines who weren't part of the call shoot. Word had spread fast. Raven 6 was on the range, and people wanted to see. Marsh stood off to the side, watching her work, watching his team transform under her guidance. He'd spent years building their skills, and in a single afternoon, she'd shown them how much further they could go. When she finally stepped back, the sun beginning its descent toward the hills, Marsh approached her. Ma'am, I need to apologize. She looked at him, calm as ever. For what? For questioning you. For not recognizing. You didn't have the information, she said simply. Can't fault you for that. I should have been more respectful. You were doing your job. She paused, her gaze steady. Good officers protect their ranges. You did that. Marsh exhaled slowly, the tension finally easing. Still, I won't forget this. Good, she said. Use it. Teach your Marines that assumptions get people killed. Always verify. Always respect what you don't know. He nodded, the lesson sinking in deeper than any manual ever could. Torres walked over, carrying a tablet. Ma'am, we've got your eval forms ready whenever you want to file them. She took the tablet, glanced at it briefly, then handed it back. Tell DOD the unit's solid. Fundamentals are strong. Recommend expanding live scenario training and reducing reliance on static qualifications. Yes, ma'am. Torres hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, it was an honor. She gave him a small nod. You've got a good team here, Sergeant. Keep pushing them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the range, Marsh walked her toward the exit. The base had quieted, the day's training winding down, the familiar sounds of engines and distant voices filling the air. Can I ask you something? Marsh said as they reached the gate. Go ahead. Why'd you tell us? Your call sign, I mean. You could have stayed anonymous. She stopped, Look back toward the range one last time. Because you asked, she said. And because your Marines needed to know that the standard they're chasing isn't theoretical. It's real. And it's been done. Marsh absorbed that, nodded slowly. It'll change how they train. That's the point. She turned to leave, but Marsh spoke again. Will we see you again? She glanced back, and for the first time that day, something close to warmth flickered in her expression. Maybe, if you keep running a range worth visiting. And then she was gone, walking through the gate and disappearing into the evening like she'd never been there at all. But she had been, and everything had changed because of it. That night, in the barracks, Hay sat with Kim and 3 other Marines, the conversation quieter than usual, more thoughtful. She didn't have to do any of that, Kim said. She could have just filed her report and left. Yeah, Hayes agreed. But she didn't. Torres walked past, heard them talking, and stopped. You know why she stayed? They looked up. Because she remembers what it's like to be where you are, Torres said. And she knows that every lesson she gives you might save your life someday. That's what real leaders do. The room went quiet, the weight of that settling in. Across the base, in his office, Captain Marsh sat at his desk, staring at the revised training schedule he'd just drafted. New drills, new standards, new expectations. Because he'd met a legend today. And she'd reminded him that the goal wasn't to be good enough. It was to be ready for the moment when good enough wasn't enough. He thought about the way she'd stood on that range, calm and unshakable, carrying a legacy most people would never know existed. And he understood now that rank didn't make someone dangerous. Experience did. Discipline did. The quiet certainty that came from having been tested in ways most people couldn't imagine and coming out the other side still standing. He saved the schedule, leaned back, and exhaled. Tomorrow, his Marines would train harder. They'd train smarter. They'd train like their lives depended on it. Because Raven 6 had shown them what that looked like. And Captain Dylan Marsh would make damn sure they never forgot it.